I'm sure you recognize Schlitzie. His face is the one most people think of when carnival freaks are mentioned. His lifelong career in the outdoor entertainment circuit as a major sideshow attraction has made him a cultural icon. He appeared in Todd Browning's 1932 film Freaks. His likeness has been borrowed over the years for merchandise, comic strips like Bill Griffith's Zippy the Pinhead, and even TV characters based on his likeness. We don't need one more repetitive history of his life and career. I'm trying to draw a straight line, to be as accurate as I can, because his story is the story of the sideshow world. A number of things that are almost certainly not true about him have attached themselves to his legend over the years, and those things are hard to shake off. I don't get to decide what's true. I just get to ask what seems most likely alongside the other facts. First, let me tell what I can confirm about Schlitzie's story, and I'll save my opinions mostly for the end. When Schlitzie first came to the sideshow world's attention, he was a tabula almost entirely rasa. The received wisdom, and that's all it is that Schlitzie was born in 1901 in the Bronx to a family who were ashamed to have him and kept him and his sister out of the public eye. And that was the way we picture the prevailing attitude of the day, when handicaps were said to be a source of shame to the family. Also, the way things happened in those days, I think we can be fairly sure that a showman, probably Pete Cortez, then a major freak show owner, heard about the two siblings and offered money to Schlitzie's birth family if they'd let him take Schlitzie and his sister off their hands for good. Whoever his family were, they took the money and never looked back. There is an undated photo of two children, one no older than 10 and a smaller girl, identified as Aztec children in the company of showman Pete Cortez. The girl appears to be Schlitzie's sister Athelia. I had thought that Athelia was just a story, but she appears at several points throughout Schlitzie's life, always with the same name, a name certainly not invented for comic effect, and I'm now inclined to believe that she and Schlitzie were in fact siblings. Cortez and his wife are said to have kept and cared for Athelia, as well as their own daughters, from childhood until she died at an unknown age. There is no consensus on the medical cause for Schlitzie's handicap. Several genetic defects can cause roughly similar effects, summed up as microcephaly. His condition caused a small stature. Measuring Schlitzie's height in the movie Freaks against the heights of the actors he twice stood up directly next to, Schlitzie stood about 4 feet tall, maybe 4 feet 2. He had a very small and oddly shaped skull and a slight curvature of the spine. Those who knew him estimated his intelligence as comparable to a 2- or 3-year-old child. Schlitzie was a male, but he was always presented as a female because he was incontinent. He had to be diapered. He had 24-hour care by a nurse all his life, and it was easier for his nurse to care for him when he was in his muumuu. To accentuate his odd head shape, his hair was clipped except for a tuft at the pinnacle. Microcephalics were usually described to the customers as pinheads. Schlitzie was variously billed as the last of the Aztecs, the Monkey Girl, Princess Ha-Ha, and even What Is It? He was such a major draw for a number of high-profile sideshows that there seemed to have been other pinheads on other shows billed as Schlitzie to profit off the name recognition. There is no shortage of photos of Schlitzie at every stage of his life. They vary widely in quality and attribution. He's one of those individuals who look different in every photo. He seems to have been exhibited in carnivals, sideshows, and amusement parks as far back as 1910, but your best look at him comes from 1932, when he was in the film Freaks. I'm coming to the conclusion that in 1932, when the film was shot, he was, rough guess, in his low 30s. And if that is so, his birth date would have been around 1901.
Oh, Schlitzie, what a pretty dress. Oh, how beautiful you look tonight. You're just a man's woman. You know what I mean? Huh? You. If you're a good girl, when I get to Paris, I'm going to buy you a big hat with a long, beautiful feather on it. Oh, hello, Elvira. Hello, Jenny Lee. Look. Hasn't Schlitzie got a beautiful dress? Isn't that pretty? When I get to Paris, I'm going to buy her a big hat with a long feather on it. And if you're a good girl, when I get to Paris, I'm going to buy you a hat with a bigger feather on it.
So fine. Well, we tell you, so fine. I wish you were man that was just the most time thing.
Why, Schlitzie, what's the matter? Oh, I'm sorry, Schlitzie.
It's so fine. It's so sharp. I was saying that's the thing on the day.
Where did he get his name? One single source claims that his name was a beer company promotion, but in the absence of corroboration, I'm reluctant to believe that. Many sources report that his birth name was Simon Metz, but there's no written evidence to confirm this. Now, I'm untrained in genealogical research, but I searched as best I could in the online records of the Mormon Church, the broadest collection of genealogy documents in existence, and I found few census records of a Simon Metz born between 1899 and 1910. There was one Simon Metz born in 1900 in New York City, but this individual doesn't seem to fit other things we know about Schlitzie's life. But we do know that in 1936, Schlitzie was working with showman Ted Metz, who must have been his legal guardian at the time, and during that time he was referred to as Schlitzie Metz. Based on this, it seems likely to me that his birth name has been lost to history. Schlitzie is remembered by those who knew him as a whimsical individual who lived his life with a sense of childlike innocence and showed affection toward everyone he met. To Schlitzie, the entire world was his friend. Ward Hall wrote, "Schlitzie was a great attraction. I remember my partner, Chris, had never seen Schlitzie before he joined our show. He said, 'That has to be the strangest human being that I've ever seen.' By the end of the season, there were people, as usual, gathered around the stage looking at Schlitzie, and Chris said, 'Why do people always want to stand around and gawk at Schlitzie? I don't understand what's so strange about him.' As you get to know people and get used to one another, things don't seem to be strange anymore. Schlitzie didn't talk very much, but sometimes when the show was going on, he would see people going around inside the show, especially women, and he'd call one or maybe more over near his stage. He would say, 'You see that man over there? That's my husband.' He was quite comical and would repeat things like a parrot. Calling the show's patrons over to his stage, he'd say whatever he had heard people discussing. Women would stand there and listen to him. It may have taken them 3 or 4 minutes, but then they would realize they were speaking to someone they didn't understand. Then they'd be embarrassed. You could see them kind of looking over their shoulder, and then they'd back away. He had this gesture, too. He would take 2 fingers of his right hand and he would tap them on the palm of his left hand and say, 'You see, you see?' When someone would drop or break something, he'd think it was really funny, with the same delight and exuberance of a small child. Schlitzie was a sweet old thing, loved by all who worked with him. After some years, George Surtees, a chimpanzee trainer, became Schlitzie's recorded legal guardian. They stayed together throughout the 40s and 50s, working for the same shows. In 1965, George passed away. He had a daughter who had not been in show business and had no contacts in it. Not knowing what else to do, she took Schlitzie to the Los Angeles County Hospital and left him in the hospital's care. Fortunately, a sword swallower by the name of Bill Unks was working at the hospital off-season, and he just happened to see Schlitzie sitting in one of the hospital's waiting rooms. So Bill tried to talk with Schlitzie, but it was really impossible to carry on a conversation. He went to the folks that worked at the hospital and asked them why Schlitzie was there by himself. When they told him what had happened, he called a sideshow performer who knew Schlitzie from the Pete Cortez sideshow, Sam, the man with two faces, Alexander, now a show owner himself. Sam came right over to the hospital and explained the situation to the administration. They ordered a psychiatric evaluation. The state psychiatrist said when he heard the story that normally he would have ordered Schlitzie institutionalized, but noting his patient's deep depression, he said, if we institutionalized Schlitzie, it would be less than 6 months, and he would be dead from a broken heart. So the state of California made Schlitzie a ward of Sam Alexander. Being back among friends and among the public restored Schlitzie's whimsical mood and gave him a second lease on life. For the next few years, Schlitzie traveled with Alexander throughout Canada and the U.S., until 1969, when age and failing health made Alexander arrange for Schlitzie's retirement. Sam set up an apartment for Schlitzie and his nurse, a guy by the name of Dick. Schlitzie occasionally came out of retirement to appear on small independent shows as far away as Hawaii. Their apartment was near MacArthur Park in Los Angeles, so on nice days, Dick would take Schlitzie out to the park and they would sit on one of the benches. People would come by and some of them would stare at Schlitzie, while others might ask questions. After a while, Schlitzie had a little following of his own made up of local people. He fed the pigeons and ducks and performed for passers-by, selling his carnival souvenir pictures. Affectionately known among the Hispanic locals as Ratoncito, Little Mouse, Schlitzie was once more playing to the locals, and that made him very happy until the time of his death in 1971 at age about 70. He died at Fountain View Convalescent Home in Los Angeles. Official cause of death, bronchopneumonia, brought on by medullary depression. Both medical terms indicating that his body just had all it could take and quit. Some accounts of his life lean a little too much on the information in the death certificate. That document is a snapshot of his situation at the time of his death in 1971. Very few facts about him rise to the surface far enough to attach themselves to the official record. Since his last legal guardian was George Surtees, his death certificate lists his name as Schlitzie Surtees. The certificate's few other terse statements outline a personal history that has, beyond those few vague details, been lost. Schlitzie Surtees was interred October 7, 1971, in an unmarked grave at Queen of Heaven Cemetery in Rowland Heights, California. In 2009, fans took up a collection to have a marker placed at his grave and had a graveside memorial service. It was a very nice, polished, ground-level marker, but today the gravesite is poorly kept and the marker is muddy. What to say about the unflattering, sinister, even frightening depictions of Schlitzie that often appear, including the character Pepper in American Horror Story? All of these say more about the viewer than about Schlitzie himself. The viewer's unease is mirrored in them. Schlitzie illustrates a unique thing about freaks, one that unsettles many people. It's not that they're so different from us, but that they're the same. In life, Schlitzie's identity was solely defined by his disability. All of the things people depend on to define their lives, even his own name, wiped away, and yet he found a secure job, comfort, and a family, and a perfectly suited home among the showmen and human oddities of the sideshow. What's most important to me as an adoptee myself is that despite a condition that left him pretty much helpless, he was loved and cared for by everyone in the sideshow business. The medical science of the time was not nearly advanced enough to say much about his condition. Today we'd be able to do prenatal genetic testing to discover more, but such a defect takes place early in the embryonic stage, and even to this day, once a person's born this way, the most that can be offered is support. About his birth family's shame. In the 21st century, that's how we think about antique attitudes, telling ourselves that, of course, we're so much better than that these days. But that's a little too easy to sit well with me. Then, just the same as now, there are any number of reasons a family might choose to keep such details not so much secret as private. Your problem is nobody else's business. That's why medical privacy is even more closely guarded now. And if you feel that there is so much more help available in this modern age, skilled professionals, doctors, therapists, government safety nets, can't they offer better remedies or support? Well, maybe and maybe not. Get those people involved, however well-intentioned, and they have a way of staying permanently involved, whether you like it or not. And there's no way to test the waters. Once you're in, you're in. And then your choices are suddenly limited by impersonal rules, flavor-of-the-month solutions based on the ever-changing theory of the week, and one-size-fits-all answers that may very well not fit you, until you're much worse off than you would have been if you just kept the problem to yourself. And once your story is released into the wild, there'll be judgments coming at you from all over. And just as happens today on the Internet, the kindly opinions are overwhelmed by the uninformed and harsh ones. If you didn't feel shame before, you will when you hear what people think about the decisions you made. You don't know. You have a duty to act, but you have no right to expect approval or even a successful outcome. It's hard to be sure what made Schlitzie's and Athelia's family sell them to Pete Cortez, but it's not hard for me to understand that the family was faced with way more than a simple choice. One person I heard from recently wrote, "I agree Schlitzie is a very interesting case, particularly as it challenges issues around how you gauge consent and vulnerability. In looking at the lives of mentally challenged freaks, and there were many of them, you'll often hear about them being traded or sent to another showman, as though they were cattle or slaves. Because several shows often played the same fares at different times of the year, showmen would exchange acts to avoid too much repetition. Schlitzie, like many other attractions, worked for various carnivals in a long line of mostly informal guardianships throughout his career. Many criticized this sort of treatment as exploiting the disabled, but the Sideshow was the only place many of these disabled performers could gain employment of any kind. Many Sideshow performers became quite wealthy. Did the Sideshow merely exploit his severe retardation, or did it give him an opportunity he could never have anywhere else, with a happiness that no other life could have offered him? Consider your career, and I'm sure you know that my audience is largely made up of entertainers. Your chosen profession, full of gawking audiences, hijinks, nudity, danger, has as much dignity as Schlitzie's. Insofar as any system provides bread, work, and dignity, that's enough for most of the world's people. Home isn't just a place, and not all families are related by blood. Schlitzie started as a blank slate without even a name, but he found his way home and he found a family, all while never being anything but himself. Schlitzie earned a happiness that no other life could have offered him, and at last, Schlitzie has his hat with the long feather.